Well, hello everyone, and welcome to Console Room 2024. This is going to be the Star Trek Plus panel where we're going to talk about the current raft of shows on Paramount Plus and beyond. And I've got some great panelists with me here today. I'm Michael Zecca, and you've seen me on a lot of panels at Console Room over the years. I'm also a lifelong Star Trek fan. Started watching it prenatally and the original series in syndication as a small child. I'm going to turn it over to Arnold to introduce himself.
I'm Arnold Blumberg. You've also seen me at console room panels plenty of times, I'm sure. I'm the owner and publisher at ATV Publishing, where we've done a couple books about Star Trek Classic, original series and Next Gen, and a little bit beyond. And also a lifelong Star Trek fan. So that's me.
Okay. And Diana?
Diana, Star Trek fan for as long as I can remember. Also doing a lot of panels at Console Room. I'm also part of TC Trek Trivia every month. I do the virtual half of it, which is just Facebook Live. It's nothing big.
Okay. And Gabby?
Hi, I'm Gabby. I am a writer. I've got short stories in like Clark's World and Strange Horizons and some other places. And I've been a fan of Star Trek since I was 13 years old. TNG is my first love. DS9 is my lifelong love. Disco turned my gaze a little bit later. Lower Decks is my platonic soulmate. And I guess Strange New Worlds is the most fun person to have a beer with.
And Taylor?
Hi, I'm Tieran Cisco. I'm a writer, author, also lifelong Star Trek fan. In fact, the first film I remember seeing in theaters is Star Trek III: The Search for Spock. My parents told me that it was actually Return of the Jedi, but since I don't remember that, I just have that stricken from the record. So I'm all about the Genesis planet. I also am one of the founders and creators of TC Trek Trivia, and every month I write about 50 questions about all things Trek. Yeah.
All right. Well, so there have been a number of newer Star Trek shows in the Star Trek universe these past few years, mostly through Paramount Plus, and there are more to come. There are some questions of what will and what won't at this point. I think we should probably just start off by talking about the one that just finished, and that is Star Trek Picard. So what do we want to say about Picard?
I'll lead off because I've got the 1701D behind me, but
Mhm.
which, by the way, covers both things I love the most from the current era, because that's actually a lower decks version of the 17. But I watched the whole run of Picard. I was very excited back in the day. Y'all remember when they had Patrick Stewart walk out that year at that convention and say, Picard's back, and it's very exciting. I watched all the way through season 1. I watched all the way through season 2, and those happened. And then I watched season 3, and it was one of the most incredibly satisfying television experiences I've had with a single season of a show in years. It was such an extraordinary accomplishment in storytelling and character exploration, especially of characters that already existed, to say nothing of new people that came in. And the final 2 episodes in particular are one of the greatest gifts I ever witnessed happening as a fan. Just an extraordinary piece of work that addressed everything from, seeing where these characters are going to wind up, to emotional beats that, took decades to resolve, to shutting up everybody that couldn't stop doing the joke about Troy flying the ship when she Tokyo drifted the Enterprise at the end, which was one of the greatest things ever. And I just thought it was brilliant. And it inspired me to instantly go and seek out showrunner Terry Matalas's previous show, 12 Monkeys, which I had never watched, and saw that he's like this. He does this kind of brilliant storytelling. So I think season 3 of Picard is a real gem and one of the best things to come out of this current era.
I will offer a different view of the season. Captain Picard is my space dad, and I love him so much. And this show started for me with so much goodwill. But for me, from my writer perspective, I feel like each season begins very strong and then becomes overwhelmed with too many plot points. It becomes harder and harder to care about the characters with so much going on. And I love nostalgia, so I was extra prepared to love this season. And indeed, the first few episodes, again, amazing. Loved to see Beverly again. Loved to see what a badass she's being. Loved Varric. What a weird, intriguing little weasel woman. What a great bringing back of old enemies in a new and intriguing way. I wish that it had been pared down to fewer plot elements, so there could have been a chance to breathe, and we could have had some more of that Star Trek really wrestling with the ethical dimensions of what we learn about what the Federation has done to Varric and her people, about what it's done to Data. Yeah, I wanted more time to slow down and for Picard to really wrestle with things ethically, which I think is one of his strongest points as a Starfleet captain and as a character. He's not an action hero. I mean, he has action hero moments, but he's there to be an ideal for us of what is true and right and what we can aspire to in terms of ethical action.
I kind of agree with, or not kind of, I fully agree with Gabby's take on season 3. I enjoyed it as a Trek fan and as a fan of TNG, but I thought that they kind of undid or took some interesting turns from the goodwill they had established and the lore they'd established the first 2 seasons. Like first and foremost for me at least was like the TNG reunion, which I know is a fan favorite, and I'm not trying to be contrarian, but I liked what I liked about the first 2 seasons was that we still got nods and callbacks and we still brought characters back and we had references, but it didn't drive the narrative. We were still getting new stories, new takes. Picard had evolved as a character. He wasn't just sort of like, here's the same person we saw from 1988 until, you know, the late 90s. This is like, he's moved on since then. And then it felt a lot with season 3. They're like, no, let's just kind of like overlook that and undo it, especially considering the runway that they set up for season 3, I thought was fantastic. I mean, season 1 kicking off in that Short Treks episode, I think was Children of Mars. I might be getting the name wrong, but the last Short Treks episode was kind of like the prologue to season 1. And season 1, I thought was phenomenal. Like the way that they basically, it was a way for old fans to stay connected, and then it could bring in new fans who knew nothing about it. And it was an intriguing premise, even though there were some interesting choices at the end with his sacrifice that was then undermined by his new body, whatever. And then season 2, I thought the biggest fault for me personally with season 2 was that they really gave us 2 or 3 seasons worth of story in one very short streaming season. I could have watched 10 full episodes in that alternate reality with President Annika. I could have watched 10 full episodes of them running around the 21st century trying to get things going and fight the Borg Queen. I could have watched just 10 full episodes of like this new incredibly like creepy and really powerful Borg, and they gave us all of that in 10 episodes, which I get it, that's the way streaming is, that's the way television entertainment is now, but it did feel like they put too much in there. So with season 3, it feels like they almost overcorrected and said, hey, sorry about that. Here is what really feels like it could have been just like a one-off reunion special for like 2 hours on like HBO Max, because you know HBO Max does that with like Fresh Prince and all those things. And that's not even the plot points. It was just sort of like, this is cool, but what happened to Picard? They kind of abandoned a lot of what they had been building up for 2 or 20 previous episodes. I mean, one of my favorite new characters was Soji or Aj. I always forget which one's the one that survived. And she basically, Soji, thank you. She basically had a cameo in the pilot, and then that's kind of it. And it's like, well, what the hell? Why are we spend 2 full seasons with someone and then just abandon them? Especially such a great character, a non-male, non-white character, which even though it's Trek and it's getting much, much, much better than it was even in the 90s, it's still a very like, you know, hey dude, lacrosse playing, Abercrombie and Fitch wearing, these are all offensive stereotypes, so I apologize, but it's still a very white dude centric universe. So it's like, well, let's not get rid of one of the most intriguing characters, all his depth. I mean, I know I'm rambling a bit, but overall, I enjoyed season 3, but not as much as I think I would have had they done some similar narrative tricks as they did with season 1 and 2.
And to your point about the characters that get centered, like, look, I'm a Picard Crusher fan. I'm very happy they had a child together, but Jack Crusher did not deserve that amount of narrative focus.
No.
Give it to Sochi, give it to Raph.
Oh, I have to agree with almost every single one of you in some point. Season 3 was my favorite, but that's just the nostalgia piece. But I did like 1 and 2, first 2 seasons, but they did undo a lot. In the season 1, they didn't exactly hint that there was marital problems with Troy and Riker. They made it look like their wonderful relationship. And then in season 3, all of a sudden they're like separated. But I mean, and I loved everything about season 3. Season 2, but like Taylor said, we could have gone put so much more in. They hype it up, and then we get these throwaway episodes that mean nothing, and then they just quickly finish it in the last 2 episodes. But I did enjoy Picard a lot. I wish they kind of kept some of the characters from season 1 and 2. And what happened to Lars?
And I'll just say, I mean, you guys have covered it pretty well. I mean, I enjoyed it, but the fan service was pretty heavy this season. I do want to give some props to Todd Stashwick. I really enjoyed the different take on a starship captain there. And he
was
and Terry,
really fun to hate.
yeah, and he and Terry have some backgrounds. I mean, that's why he was in there, but he did a great job, and he really warmed up to me. I love what they kind of set up with a potential follow-up series around a Captain 7. I know there's a lot of fans that would love to see this Star Trek Legacy show. Don't know if it'll ever happen, but I think it was a good way to end things.
Hey, we got Strange New Worlds.
Yes, and that's the thing. We did get that from other things. So let's move on and talk about another show. Let's talk about Star Trek Discovery, which is entering its 5th and final season, airing beginning in April.
I'll be the really positive one on this go around. I really love Star Trek Discovery. I think they had a tricky second season that kind of turned me off, but I think they recovered from it well in their subsequent seasons. And I really like that they're in the future now. I like that there's weird science. I like the themes throughout the most recent season of mental health, of communication, of working through differences. The fact that even though the Federation is in dire straits, it's still upheld as an ideal, and we do see the necessity of the Federation as something to strive for and as a hopeful utopia that people still invest a lot in. And I do love all the characters, like have a special place in my heart.
I'll jump on that. Sorry, go ahead.
So like I liked season 2. Not only that it gave us Pike, but it also gave us a different storyline and brought us to the future. I like the characters, I love them, but I'm also okay with it ending because the last 2 seasons have been planet killer episodes. And it just was almost like they just repeated the last season from the season before. So I'm okay with it ending. I do like to see some things like more with Tilly or something, but I'm optimistic that season 5 will be okay, will be good, but I don't know. It's hard to know because just been repeating the series.
I think Discovery, and I'll say this now and then I'll probably have to eat my words later or something, but I think Discovery is going to age a lot like Deep Space Nine, where when that was airing, a lot of Trekkies and outsiders, for whatever reason, just it didn't do it for them. And then, of course, after rewatching and coming back to it, for a lot of Trekkies, those same Trekkies are like, this is the strongest series. This is my favorite series. I think Discovery, since we're talking about the whole series and not just the last season, I think their biggest stumbling block in the first 2 seasons was really in that weird kind of like in-between prequel thing, which really tied the writer's hands. And then in season 3, when they could finally separate from all that, 50 some odd years of established canon and really do their own thing, I thought that was like a great start. And so I thought season 5 was really kind of like a season 2 for Discovery, because it's like, hey, we're in this new space, thousands of years past all the other franchises. Now we can do really whatever we want. And I thought that some of the story arcs they're presenting, especially in this most recent season, been really fascinating. Like the idea of this dark matter anomaly, entity, but the big bad for the season 4 was great because it wasn't really an antagonist. And I feel like Star Trek, some of the strongest writing is when it's not like a villain per se, but like more of a problem to solve. And then having the closest thing to an antagonist be Book was fantastic because then they added depth. And I know that Michael, especially in those first 2 seasons, got a lot of narrative focus, a lot of screen time. but it feels like now they've not only have they found out how to balance it with the other characters, but they also kind of justified why she was getting so much. Because Sonequa Martin Green, holy crap, she was acting her ass off in every single episode. Like when you go back and rewatch it, like those are like powerhouse performances every single time, because she's a newly minted captain, and now like her lover, partner, companion is sort of the bad guy, but he's the bad guy in that he's just trying to solve a problem in a way that the others disagree with. And I thought that kind of like conflict that's not a conflict, I thought that was really, really great. And I again, I'll say it, I think that a few years from now or decades from now, when Trekkies are going back and rewatching it, I think it's going to be like, oh my God, like some of these, the writing, the performances, the story arcs, this is some of the best Trek we have to offer. I think right now it's just like embarrassment of riches. We have Lower Decks, we've got Strange New Worlds, we have so much Trek, and it's such a different tone that Disco by itself gets kind of like lumped in. It's like, oh, it's too heavy, or it's too slow, or it's too weird. And having that kind of stumbling block off the gate with being tied to so much canon didn't really help much.
Yeah, I've heard people say that each time gets the Star Trek it needs. And I think the last season of Disco spoke to me so much, partly because of that, because in a time of so much divisiveness and people being so reactive around things, it was really great to see like these two people who love each other, but who have very different responses to a serious pressing problem. And how do good people with good intentions work through that?
Arnold, you got anything to add?
I don't really.
That's okay. I'll throw in my
I've kind
2
of
cents if you want.
I've given Discovery a chance every single season and watched the first few episodes and literally have never been able to watch the show. So the previous season I finally just didn't bother at all. But that doesn't mean anything. It
Oh yeah.
didn't speak to me. And
Yeah.
I'm wondering now, personally, I'm wondering if what he just said is true. And maybe in a few years or something, I'll sit down and go, you know what I should do? I should start from the beginning and watch Discovery again and see what it's like. And I've done that with shows and found that I love it. So maybe it just
Yeah.
didn't hit me at the time, but maybe it'll be one that'll be waiting for me in the future that'll be really nice to revisit. So I'll see that. I'll see then.
We talked a bit about, how there were some issues with the first 2 seasons of Discovery. There were a lot of behind the scenes strife involving toxic producers and the writing staff changing over, which I think affected the storytelling a lot those first 2 seasons. I really think it took until the 3rd season for the show to figure out what show it wanted to be.
That
And
happens a lot.
maybe if they had simply started in the future, or started with, time traveling to the future in the pilot or something, maybe it would have been a more solid show from the get-go. That being said, despite the fact that season 1 of Discovery is like 3 different shows, 3 very different tones, season 3 and 4, although you said repetitive, Diana, it has been a bit more consistent in its style. And I think that season 5 is going to continue that trend. And I will say this, that unlike, say, Star Trek Voyager, I like the characters on Star Trek Discovery, despite the fact that sometimes I haven't always enjoyed the plot. I was invested in the characters. In Voyager, I was often not invested in the characters. So Discovery has kept my attention for that reason. And I am looking forward to see where they go with them in this new season.
I feel like in Discovery, we don't know very much about any of the characters. I mean, it's like we know more in Strange New Worlds and Lower Decks in the first episodes than we through season 4. We don't know much about any of them except for Michael, Saru. We know a little bit about Book now, but Ditmer and Oa don't know that much about them. And then when they gave us a character and gave us a backstory, they killed her right away.
And see, that's my problem with season 2 is if you have that kind of characterization where you're focusing mostly on the main characters and you get like only fed a little bit about the background characters, you can't tip your hand by giving us suddenly a bunch of emotional information about a character. We know they're gonna die. It's not a surprise. Like season 2's plotting just, in my opinion, gave us too much emotional information too close to the incident that they wanted us to be emotional about. it really made me yearn for Deep Space Nine and the way they carefully plotted out emotional and plot information across seasons so that it all came together in a beautiful package, and was a surprise and hit me where it hurt.
I really think that hindrance of and I'm going to be the old man complaining about this a lot, right? Every season we talk about, but this idea of these 10 episode seasons for streaming, I think with Disco, even aside from kind of the production woes and the behind the scenes turmoil that they were going through, it feels very much like those first two seasons, they were writing for a 26 episode season and then trying to cut it down to 10 episodes. And you can't really do that. It's just like, it's a violation of physics. If you have this much, it doesn't fit in a space that's this big. This is Trek. It's not Who. They don't have a TARDIS. So if they would have committed and just said, you know what, this is the Michael show, I think season 1 and 2 would have had a lot more, even some of the early parts of season 3, I think it would have been a lot smoother ride, and just saying like, you know what, yeah, this is our focal point. Like there'll be other characters, but when you're tuning in to watch Michael Burnham and everything she goes through. And the first half of season 1, I thought did a really good job of that, much to the chagrin of some Trekkies.
Yeah.
And I think that's why that first half, because remember they split the season in that first season, it was so strong. And then it started to get a little like wibbly wobbly towards that second half, because like, oh shoot, we have all these other actors in the cast. We should probably talk about them a little bit too. And it's like, oh no, don't do that. And then season 2, they definitely were like, well, let's explore the Discovery crew, but also here's 3 new characters with Pike and Una and Spock.
Right.
Let's get them in the mix. It's like, well, you have,
and then oops, they've suddenly become everyone's focus because we love those characters and we gave them their own spin-off. So let's move that discussion forward to Strange New Worlds, since we kind of seem to be heading there. So Strange New Worlds is, is a show that is essentially Star Trek as it was supposed to be in 1964, with that cast basically, but with modern sensibility that spun off of Star Trek Discovery. And we've now had 2 seasons of Strange New Worlds under our belt, and we've got a 3rd season that will happen, but we don't know when it's going to air because the strike has set so many things back. It may be 2025. How are we feeling about Strange New Worlds so far, and where do we want it to go?
Oh gosh.
I mean, I'm not
Everywhere.
leading off anymore, so
I want it to go all the way to Kirk.
I think Strange New Worlds is, oh, sorry, go ahead.
Oh, but we don't have to keep bringing in the legacy characters like Scotty or something. Like it was a small amount, which was good, but we don't have to make sure all that cast is there for when Kirk takes over. I'd like to see him bring in some of them, which pretty much check off and Sulu. So
Yeah, I think Strange New Worlds is super fun. I think if you have a friend who likes Star Trek but hasn't watched it in a while and isn't sure where to start, Strange New Worlds is a great gateway drug. It's got some familiar characters. It's got the vibe of the TOS and a little bit of TNG. There's a lot of weird science. There's a lot of funny stuff. The actors are all amazing. Anson Mount's a fantastic Pike. I love both the old and the new characters. I will say that some disabled fans have brought up some issues with the show's ableism, with Hemmer having a heroic sacrifice, and then you lose that character, with Captain Pike seeing his future and only thinking of the options of death or resigning himself to that, and not thinking about ways that he might creatively accommodate that future with perhaps different assistive devices, changing time in that way instead of totally undoing it. And also with the eugenics wars, with making the genetically modified people the ones who are oppressed and not necessarily recognizing the real world impact that eugenics has had in our world and why that fear would be created against that population. So I do think that there are issues that the show doesn't necessarily always tackle. And I hope that in the future, they'll tackle those with a little bit more grace. But I do enjoy the characters and I do enjoy the plot lines.
I enjoyed Strange New Worlds right from the beginning too. And I mean, obviously it was like, you're bought into it first because, okay, we're on the Enterprise again, although a very different one. And I also think that the new design of this particular Enterprise is one of the most beautiful designs of a ship I would be happy to live on and work on that I've ever seen. It's just beautiful, very pristine. And yet then you get wonderful homey stuff like Pike's Kitchen, and it's just a beautiful design. And I also enjoyed season 1 a lot. Had some misgivings about some of the stories, but again, the beauty of that is this is more sort of anthological in that approach. So you're going to have hits and misses. Second season, I found overall more of a disappointment than I expected, with a lot of things misfiring. First of all, it's enough of Kirk already. I mean, again, we don't need to rush this, and we certainly don't need him on all the time. So there was that, but there's so many great characters and great points. And Gabby mentioned some of the same issues I had. One of the things I found, and unfortunately I didn't prepare enough to like make notes or anything, but there are some disturbing sort of right-wing talking point kind of moments in the show that bother me a lot. That I'm not sure they're intentional or that they know what they're doing, but it's weird how sometimes this show, which is everything about a progressive future, this series in particular often does episodes with points and story beats that feel very much like someone watching Fox would be happy. And that bothers me a lot. I think one of the biggest issues, of course, goes back to the previous season, which is that basically Pike is taught a lesson in the Balance of Terror episode that wanting peace and wanting to talk to people is not necessarily a good idea, and let's shoot them. And that really threw me completely that we were endorsing that idea. And the Gorn thing is just a nonstop barrage of othering that drives me insane. They have turned the Gorn. Yes, I get it. It was a silly looking costume, but come on. You can make that look nice for 2023 and have a humanoid Gorn to be fine.
They made the Gorn look good on Enterprise.
Yes, and the thing is to then take that, an episode whose entire message was Kirk learns that it's a good idea to communicate with the other instead of just treating it as a monster and killing it. And instead, at every turn, making our main characters on Strange New Worlds afraid of them, mad at them, desiring to kill them, turning them into baby-laying monsters that give you no reason to want to care about them at all. It bothers me a lot. And then at the same time, this show is capable of things like Subspace Rhapsody, which was a beautiful piece of work and reminded me of the best versions of things like the Buffy musical, where it's a musical that also moves the characters forward and has them have emotional revelations. One of my favorite things was the two-sided thing of Chapel and Spock realizing where they are emotionally at this point. And
Arnold, I wanted to say, comparing it to
beautiful.
the Buffy musical, I think the songs in the Buffy musical are actually individually more memorable, but I think
Some of them are.
But I think they move the plot along better in the Subspace Rhapsody episode.
And one other thing I'll add, and I'm sorry to monopolize there. One other thing I'll add is my all-time favorite moment in season 2, though, which I think is very telling, is those old scientists, which I think was the best thing they did all season.
Yeah.
And there were also, one other thing, there are also episodes I couldn't even watch, which shocked me.
Yeah.
Natalie and I sat down to watch the episode that I will never be able to finish seeing, with the ringing noise. There's a thing where there's the ringing noise. Within 5 seconds of that damn noise playing, we both got dizzy and had to turn the television off. And Natalie has a lot of more sensory reaction than I do about some things. And she was dizzy for like an hour afterward. And I'm thinking, maybe think a little more about how different a lot of your viewers are before you decide to barrage them with sounds. So I'm sorry, that just really got me. There's a lot of weird stuff in season 2 of this show that really threw me, and I'm still wondering what the hell's going on. So that's me.
Well, I thought that Strange New World season 2, in another controversial statement, was like the ultimate Trek because it took the best of everything that come before it. And unlike Lower Decks, which definitely acknowledges everything that came before it and kind of like, pokes fun at it and has, enjoys it alongside as a fan, it feels like Strange New World season 2, like it got it because it is episodic like TOS, but just like DS9, the things that happen in previous episodes, the things that are established as having had happened like prior to the season or off camera and things like that, still impact the characters. They still react to them, even though it's still like it's a self-contained episode with a beginning, middle, end. The characters are still dealing with whatever had happened, whether it's him or sacrifice, whether it's like the result of the Federation Klingon War. I thought two of the best episodes, Ad Astra per
Aspera.
Aspera,
Mhm.
that was basically Measure of a Man done the right way, because it was sort of like, this is not necessarily a court system, this is a military tribunal, for lack of a better term. The rules are different, and we're also digging with like both institutional and systemic bigotry, but also like bold-faced, just outright prejudice, but also this veneer of professionalism, militarism, and that's so much happening in that one episode. And again, the performances were masterful. And then the other one that was a big standout for me was the Cloak of War, or maybe it's Under the Cloak of War, something Cloak of War, but basically the Klingon, general warlord who is now flipped, and the ambassador is now going for peace. That episode with Dr. Mbenga and Nurse Chapel dealing with this, we were just in a huge interstellar war. They didn't just walk away from it, and having those feelings, and then having that sort of like pale moonlight ending where it's kind of like, oh shoot, like, even I would argue even better than pale moonlight's ending, because it's ambiguous even for the viewers. Like in DS9, we know that Cisco was, an accessory to murder. He did what he needed to do to get the Romulans in the war. Sorry, 30-year-old spoilers. But he, we're still with him because he's Captain Cisco. With Cloak of War, like, Dr. Mbenga probably murdered the ambassador, but at the same time, maybe the ambassador did fall. But it's left so ambiguous, and then it also builds that weird tension between Pike and Mbenga, where it's kind of like Pike's like, I can't say I believe you, but I don't have any reason not to trust you either. And this is beautiful ambiguity. One point I wanted to just kind of a quick friendly counter to Arnold, your point about the Gorn being like completely dehumanized or anthropomorphized, since they're not human anyway. I think that was kind of like a really, I had the same feeling you did at first, and then upon rewatching it, and then watching the Kirk episode, of course, I was like, oh, this kind of makes sense a little bit from a broader perspective as a franchise, because of course, like, Kirk can't learn his lesson unless Pike's crew has these same like prejudices. They have to see the Gorn as this like faceless monster threat with no redeeming values. They have to be destroyed on sight. They're completely inhuman. Because that way, when Kirk's like, oh, wait, no, the Gorn are not these monsters, it's almost like a learning moment. It's sort of like what they try to do in Star Trek VI, The Voyage Home, with the Klingons, except everyone loves Klingons, so no one really felt that they were like really bad guys. They were bad guys, but they're cool bad guys. And so I think that was like a really interesting and almost kind of a brilliant choice on the part of the writer, saying, wait, we can't have Pike's crew being as evolved as Kirk's crew, or being as like, they can't learn the lessons that Kirk crew is going to learn, because then that kind of undermines the lessons of TOS. It changes the nature. So of course, at this point, of course, the Federation would be a little bit, or at least this Enterprise crew would be a little bit more prone to dismissing a threat and not considering all these alternatives. And then you consider Pike's background and the trauma that he is going to experience, the visions that he's had, and say, oh, okay, that it feels like it falls in line narratively. It was jarring, and it does feel a little uncomfortable. But then you take that, at least for me, taking that step back, like, well, okay, in the broader sense of this Star Trek universe and these timelines, that it does sort of track, even if it's a bit uncomfortable.
Diana, you got anything to add?
Honestly, I don't think I saw any of the right wing stuff that Arnold was saying, but maybe if I rewatch it now, knowing, I might see some of it. But I think I was just so engrossed with the fact that I love this series that I just went with it. But yeah. And I do love the actor who's playing Kirk right now.
Paul Wesley.
Yes.
Yes. But let's kind of give us some Sam, maybe. Just because with that mustache, how do you not have some?
Yeah. I'm just going to add a couple things on this myself, and then we'll move to the next topic. Strange New Worlds has definitely gone for the format of classic Trek of wrapping things up at the end of the episode. That doesn't mean that they don't grow the characters over time, but they're not doing those overarching season plots that are much more common on television today. They've gone, and I think that does appeal to older Star Trek fans. My father could never get into the Next Generation, certainly wouldn't be able to get into these ongoing season arcs, but I think Strange New Worlds is a show he could actually enjoy. That being said, I think that was been one of Discovery's downfalls in some ways, is trying to do those full season stories. I think they've done it sometimes at the expense of the individual stories. I think Strange New Worlds has really excelled with the individual stories, even with its misses. And I think this is where other shows like Lower Decks have found a nice happy medium. Lower Decks does some wonderful full season arcs, but still hits the notes with the individual stories in between. I will say this other thing, and this is from my wife. When we get to the end of each season of Strange New Worlds, like, that's it? Don't we get more episodes? The seasons do seem too short for Strange New Worlds. 10 episodes is really short. I understand in the streaming model and in the modern climate that we're not going to be doing 25 episode seasons, but 13 seems like a better mark than 10 for a show like this. Lower Decks works at 10. I think Strange New Worlds leads at least 13.
You know, another problem with that, by the way, is that the second season, we barely got any of Pike.
Yeah.
Because he and his wife were having a baby.
Yeah.
And
well, also, when
away.
you have an ensemble cast this large and you're trying to give each of them a focus episode, doesn't leave you much time for everybody.
No.
You have to miss out on some people, and it was Pike this year for the reasons you just addressed. Well, let's go into these old scientists on Lower Decks, since they did cross over with Strange New Worlds this year. So Star Trek Lower Decks had its 4th season this year, and it's got a season 5 coming, probably late summer again, like we've had the last few years. I will say myself, my first run Star Trek show was the original animated series. And while I know Lower Decks very much is in a format that is the logical successor to TNG, DS9, Voyager in that future time frame, it's also, referenced all the shows, but at its core, it is a love letter to the original animated series, and I love that. I'll pass it over to the rest of you to say some things about Lower Decks.
Yeah, I was so skeptical of an animated, humorous Star Trek show, and Lower Decks has just blown me away. And I think I think it just comes genuinely from the love of the show, the fact that the writer's room has a balance of like diehard fans and people who know less about it. So they're able to throw in those really obscure references to delight people like me. But the plots are still tight and engaging, and the characters still fun and charming, even if you know none of it, like my friends Katie and Nate, who haven't really watched Star Trek before, but are really enjoying Lower Decks. It's so funny. I love the deep cuts. The Deep Space Nine circling thing is the funniest thing I have ever seen. I love that they brought back the actress who played Ensign Gomez, like out of acting retirement. She's a journalist now, and they brought her back for like an episode. And I just feel like, they're solid. The plots are solid. They're just like solid next generation style plots, but played for humor instead of the dramatics, and yet still often having very dramatic and meaningful endings. And I'll just say, I love the revelation of where Mariner's whole deal is coming from at the end of this season. I love seeing the source of that trauma. It makes so much sense to me. And fantastic.
And they also brought back the actress for Cedo too, for the flashback. Also somebody who's barely worked in a long time. Exactly what Gabby says. I can't honestly say if I really was concerned when they first said it. I mean, I'm somebody like, I didn't quite grow up. I wasn't quite born enough for the first run, but for the first run of repeats of the very first shows, sort of in that, I guess, the aging, turning to dust people for Star Trek. And I was instantly in love with Lower Decks from the first episode. Loved it. To the point where I really feel, sometimes you feel with this kind of thing, when particularly have multiple shows, Lower Decks to me is the present day current Star Trek. That's where I feel we are. Everything else is a trip to the past, to the future, but Lower Decks is where we are right now. And I think there are times where they miss. It's not always consistent, but I think one of the things we've all said here today about the many shows we've already talked about is that even when in a given show or a plot may not work for one or a lot of us, it's the characters we fall in love with and we're eager to see more about and emotionally connect with. And it's the same thing with them. I thought Mariner's arc is so far is brilliant. All of them, brilliant. to the point where when they did show up in those old scientists, it didn't remotely feel like a violation of anything. It was like, this made
Yeah.
perfect sense.
Yes.
And we desperately need to get Rutherford and Tendi there next time, because the beauty of it is they just happen to have cast people for the voices that can totally easily carry off the physical performance as well.
Yeah.
How Quaid did that walk, I'll never know either.
Well,
but
and the way
magical.
they had already been doing this when Jack Quaid was at San Diego Comic-Con a year or
Right.
two ago. He came with like a kind of a plasticky purple wig thing
Yes.
going, doing the Boimler hair already. And yeah, doing the Section 31 walk. That was hilarious. Calling back to other Lower Decks episodes with visuals like that.
Like Gabby said too, the storytelling on this show is amazing for a show that, like, anybody that dismisses this is, oh, this is a vulgar, funny show. No, it's not. It's a totally serious, real Star Trek show that happens to use humor organically in the context of the characters, but the storytelling is just as real and just as emotional. And I thought it was very brave already in season 4 to move them on and start showing progress, because it means you lose that hallway, which was like in a sitcom, it's our home base. It was kind of jarring to watch some of season 4 and feel like, oh my God, time's really passing for them.
And they're truly growing these characters over time. And all 4 of them are getting their own growth arcs. And it's wonderful.
It's wonderful.
And they're having their failures along the way, and they're picking up and moving on from it. It's fantastic what they're doing with this show. Yeah.
I hope they let it keep going.
I will also say, again, they do individual stories well, but they also do an over season arc well. But what's great about Lower Decks is this is not the flagship of the fleet. They don't have to do the Planet Killer season, a Planet Killer enemy. They could have the Packlids as their main enemy one season, and this season they called back Nick Locarno of all people. I mean,
they made that joke, like, doesn't he look like Paris? And
yes. And this is after, Boimler was following Tom Paris around for an episode with his collector plate. So, yeah. And again, when they brought him on These Old Scientists, I mean, Boimler is in Pike's quarters and he sees the settle. And Jonathan Frakes is directing. And Jack Quaid has to do the Riker step up onto the saddle, the Riker style, sitting in a chair, and says Riker while he's doing it, just to get a laugh out of Jonathan Frakes, and they work it into the episode. the actors know what they're doing. It's fantastic. So much so that we're going to come back to that when we talk about one of the other future shows.
For sure. One thing I do want to throw out too about what's made Lower Decks just great, especially in season 4, is that not only are they like referencing in-universe Trek, but like it seems like they're definitely listening to fan lore as well, and fan conversations. The episode where they're in the cave is like, I have had that same nerdy conversation about how every cave episode is like one of 3 different scenarios at so many cons over all these years. And for them to acknowledge that like right away, it was just really great. And the other point too, just throw out there, it's like, I don't even see Lower Decks as a comedy per se, because every Trek series like has comedic elements. It's just it's like a balance, and like usually in that recipe, like the sci-fi or the drama or whatever will take a little bit more precedence over the comedic elements. Lower Decks is the same mix, just a smidge more of the comedy mixed in, because like those dramatic beats, the emotional beats, even like the danger and the action beats, those are right up there with any of the live action shows.
They've had episodes where entire ships have been destroyed and people have been lost. There has been death and loss and serious drama on that show, and it pays off when you're that invested in
they even addressed Lieutenant Shaxs dying and then coming back from the dead, which is a Trek trope. They
I love the whole koala mythology. It's just I hope we get more and more of that.
Well, and then they did that to Boimler. But there's people, and they say that Lower Decks isn't canon, and I don't understand. There's so much drama to it, and it carries on the story. Who cares if it does some callbacks? It's a love story to Trek, and it's canon. And people are like, no, it's not, until These Old Scientists. Like, well, that makes it canon.
Life's too short to listen to those people. This doesn't work.
And another of the many things I love about Lower Decks, and they were doing this right in the finale in season 4 as well, is the musical callbacks.
Yeah.
that reference the source material.
A lot of great James Horner stuff.
They were dealing with a Genesis device and a
Yeah.
nebula, and there was the Mutara Nebula music and the Genesis device music right in the midst of things. I mean, I love the attention to detail that they have in this show.
Look, bringing back around to the beginning, obviously, I put myself out there at the beginning with Picard. I still stand by it, by the way. But I will say this about that. There are many, like at least one or two of you pointed out, like the fan service in 3 and felt like that went too far, whatever. Lower Decks is built on a massive like infrastructure of, as Gabby was saying, callbacks and deep cuts. But the beauty in the way they do it is that none of it is strictly required for anyone to understand or get, except as an additional level of joy while watching the show. But it doesn't affect your ability to appreciate the emotional arcs of the characters or the stories. And then you learn maybe a few things about trivia. Oh, that's cute, that little bit. But arguably, you could say Lower Decks is an example of it at its most insane and most expansive, and yet doing it right because they don't rely on it. It's just that it's a layer, and if you see that layer, you can enjoy it, and that's it.
Ooh, that's a great term, expansive. Sorry, just triggered. There's that episode where they go to the Orion for the wedding in Tindy's family, and like Lower Decks is doing for the Orions what DS9 did for Klingons and Ferengi. Like, it's opening up the world in a way that, and it's so fantastic. Maybe not so much with Badgie. I'll come out and like be the bad guy. I'm not a fan of Badgie, but just getting that deep dive in the culture. And I think that's another brilliant choice for the writers and the staff to be like, look, we have like, again, 5 decades of canon to choose from, and we can definitely sprinkle in all these like Easter eggs and callbacks and nods and homages and like bringing back actors. But they're also not like skimping on the opportunities to actually keep expanding the world of Trek and like getting more and more into it. So like every character feels like, every species, every like homeworld, every piece of technology, it's like, oh, this all feels so much bigger. It feels like we are exploring the galaxy now because there's more than just Strange New Worlds Gorn.
Okay,
we're getting peanut hamper.
Peanut hamper.
We're getting a little tight on time, so we're gonna got a few more shows we got to talk about fairly quickly. Next one is going to be Star Trek Prodigy, which was a show that initially was airing on a combination of Nickelodeon and Paramount Plus, but Paramount Plus, in its cost cutting, decided to cut it out and sell it off to Netflix. For season 1, we'll be dropping on Netflix on December 25th, 2023, and we will be getting season 2 sometime in 2024 on Netflix. We don't know if we're going to get more Prodigy after that. The producers have ideas for up to 7 seasons, but it may well depend on how well it does on Netflix. I will just say this. I went into that show not expecting much. It's a show aimed at small children. It has those conceits. That being said, when I got to the mid-season finale, I started to really appreciate this show, and the second half is exceptional. This show is also very much a love letter to Star Trek Voyager, of all things, and it's doing it well, despite my own lack of love for Voyager. I am enjoying that. So I am very excited to see where they go with season 2 of this show. Quickly, anybody have anything they want to say about Prodigy?
I loved Prodigy. I thought splitting the seasons was another weird choice. Because I thought they could have easily, especially for like what's a kids show, they could have kept it running. But it has a lot of the elements we talked about for all the other series. There's references, there's callbacks, there's homages, there's stuff for the fans. It's got its own story arc, so you have well-developed characters. Gwen is probably my favorite new Star Trek character of the 21st century. She's like got so much depth. I really want to see a lot more of Gwen. But that episode Kobayashi, when Dahl is testing his leadership skills on the holodeck, and he's like, well, I need the best crew ever, and they're getting like the I don't want to spoil it if you haven't seen it, even though it's been out for quite some time. I think they came out back in January-ish of last year, maybe, or February. But like that hit like right here, and I'm a cynical like television watcher. I'm like, oh, that's great. I'll see something happen. Like, oh, that's really cool, but it never like I don't get choked up. And it's like, yeah, I really like that. But like hearing some of the archival recordings and some of the actors they brought back for that, just for that one scene, I was like, oh my God, okay, this is the best track. And I think that second half, when they figured out, like, you know what, even though we're for kids, we can do kind of like a Star Wars Rebels kind of thing and still have the same like immersive, in-depth storytelling. We'll just change the language and make it more youth appropriate. We'll tone down some of the violence and have it more fun, but we'll still give you the complex like plots and arcs that you'd want in a adult show. But yeah, I love Prodigy, and whenever you're like, Prodigy, like, no, you watch Prodigy. You gotta check it out.
Yeah, I will say this too. We've been Chris missed most of Prodigy on my first viewing, and we've been going back and progressively watching through season 1 again. And I'm appreciating the first half of the season a lot more binging it than I did watching it week to week. It holds together better binge. So for those of you that haven't seen Prodigy yet, if you just go back and watch it in chunks rather than one episode at a time, I think you will appreciate it more. Anybody have anything quick to add, Prodigy? Because we are tight on time.
Just it's a really beautiful show.
Okay. All right. So in the future, what do we still have coming this year? Well, since 2019, they've talked about doing a TV series of a spinoff of Discovery called about Section 31, featuring Michelle Yeoh's Empress Georgiou. It's now been turned into a 2-hour film that's going to go straight to Paramount Plus. That's going to begin filming next month. There's talk that they might do some streaming Star Trek movies every couple years, although with the way cost cutting is happening at streaming, I don't know if that'll happen. Quick comments. Anybody actually want a Section 31 series, or what do you want from it or from a film?
I love Michelle Yeoh. Yeah. And basically, I want Georgiou being badass. I will say I'm very nervous about Section 31 for many of the reasons Arnold brought up, having hesitancies about Strange New Worlds. Yeah. I think I love the way Section 31 complicated Deep Space Nine, but I think in recent references, we've leaned too close to making it cool and edgy and whatever. And like, no, Section 31 is bad. The fact that the Federation still has Section 31 is bad. It should not be there. It is a direct contradiction to the ideals of the Federation. And I really hope that they're going to portray it that way, but I'm worried.
Yeah, I've hated the idea of Section 31 since it was introduced on Deep Space Nine, to be perfectly honest. So that's the thing I don't like about this. On the other hand, I could watch Michelle Yeoh read the phone book. So, all right. So then the other one we got, Star Trek Starfleet Academy, is a new TV series that was announced that's going to be beginning production sometime in early 2024. IMDb actually lists a May release date for the pilot episode, but I think that might be wrong. We don't know a whole lot about this. We know it's going to be focused on some cadets, but we don't even know what time period it's set in.
Well, first of all, we know Tawny Newsome is on the writing staff.
Yes,
so
that's the one good thing I've heard, is that Tawny Newsome is on the writing staff.
Awesome. They can't have found a better person who's both a fan and a creator to work on it. Yep. And a while back, before they stopped saying anything, a couple people were referring to the fact that it was likely, and if you read the stuff that's come out officially about it, it does imply the idea that the Academy is like coming back, or like, we're doing this again. Yeah. While the implication being, and people had, I think, talked a little too much before they told them not to, is that this is set post the Discovery future. Yeah.
I've kind of wondered if it's supposed to be a Tilly spinoff, like she would be like the head instructor.
And they said that Tilly might be the one character that's most certain to be, but that it's, what is that, 32nd century?
Yeah, something like that, yeah.
But that's the implication, is it's an academy being rebuilt in the 32nd century. But Tawny Newsome, so we've got at least one person in that room that we know is reliable for any kind of creativity. So there's
that line in the official announcement from this past spring or so, where they're talking about like the campus is for the first time in over a century, the campus will be readmitting. Now that could mean a number of things, of course. It could be it's far in the future, or it could be they shut it down because of some threat from some of the previous series. My hopes for Academy are that it deviates from the Star Trek like genre formula, because Star Trek is a big enough world, and I think Lower Decks has probably done the most to prove it, that you can really do any kind of program and set it in the Star Trek universe. So it would be nice to have a show that's just kind of like, one of my favorite episodes of DS9 is when they're on Earth during the Dominion War. and we kind of actually get to see non-Federation or non-Starfleet Federation members doing their thing. Like this is what life was like in the 24th century. So I'm really hoping Starfleet Academy kind of leans in that direction where it's less about, okay, I know it's a military academy and they're going to be training to join Starfleet, and so they can get assigned to a ship or a post, but it'd be really cool to have them focus on like a workplace dramedy, like something like West Wing or even The Office, but in Starfleet Academy. I would love that, especially with Tawny Newsome writing. Similar to Section 31, like I'm not a huge fan of the concept per se, at least not how they've done it in the past. But if they have it more like, like Captain America's Winter Soldier style, where it's sort of like, okay, Section 31 is this kind of like covert, questionably ethical agency, and they're folding from within, or something, or like Homefront, that could be kind of a cool approach for us to go into like more of an espionage series, but in the Star Trek universe. So for Academy, I mean, if it comes out like a CW drama, that would be kind of cool too. I would definitely watch Riverdale, like
Do you want it to be
24th century.
Are you at all afraid it might become Class? The Doctor Who spinoff that didn't really go anywhere.
Oh God.
I trust this writing and production staff to like save us from that. But if it leaned into like a Sarah Jane Adventures, that could be kind of cool too, though.
That's true. That's true. All right. Well, we are really tight on time, so I think we might have to cut up most of the discussion there. I will just throw out that obviously, even before the strikes hit, there was a lot of turbulence going on with the streaming services, and they're looking at cutbacks and cutting costs and potential mergers. And there's been news in the last 24 hours at the time that we're recording this in December of potentially a WB Discovery Paramount Plus merger. And do we know what David Zaslav likes to do with shows? So how things will progress with these shows in the future, we don't know. That's a whole nother panel to discuss. So anyway, everyone, I'm going to give you a quick chance to plug other things you might be doing either at the con or on the outside. Arnold, let me start with you.
Find all the books that ATB publishes at atbpublishing.com, and please do check out my strip that I do every Monday and Friday called Pickles and Bean, which is at picklesandbean.com. We're heading into our 3rd year.
Cool. And Diana, you got anything to plug?
I'll be on some panels at Console Room. Taylor and I will be doing a mock trial on Classic and New Who, civil trial instead of criminal trial.
Nice.
So be interesting. Take a look for us.
Gabby?
You can find my writing at Gabriela-Santiago.com, or you can follow me at writing-related activities on Tumblr and Instagram. My short story, Reconstructing the Goldenrod Conspiracy, Edina Room 230 to 330, is coming out in Lightspeed in fall 2024 if you'd like to read a short story set in an alternate universe through the lens of a convention panel.
And Taylor?
Nice. I do have a new book that will be out when this airs called Nowhere Sleeping, which is a collection of short stories that are tied together by a loose thread. But my best writing achievement that you should definitely check out at Console Room is I was one of the 163 writers who was like honored to be a part of Outside In Regenerates, published by ATB Publishing, which is 163 stories about every episode of Classic Who. It's fantastic. I think there's a panel, depending on when you're watching this, there is a panel happening, or their panel has happened. Definitely check it out. It was a lot of fun to contribute, and the writing, not just me, of course, but the 162 other writers are phenomenal.
And I don't know what order the panels will be in this weekend, but I am doing a panel about how to be a panelist, especially on a virtual panel. So if something you're interested in doing, come see what Gordon and I have to share there. Also have one where we're talking about guest stars in Doctor Who, both their role in things and some of the big names that have been in the show over the years. All right. Well, thank you, everyone. Enjoy the rest of Console Room 2024, and we'll see you around.